Recording in progress.
Thank you. Just a few introductory statements about myself. I've been in ANPA since 1987. I was gainfully employed doing research, particularly in management research. And during that period, I decided that examining companies, organizations, and so on was best viewing social systems as if they were alive. So that was the background. I want to say a few words.
Michael, could you go into slideshow? Then we have bigger picture. It's a little bit small. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
I want to say a few words about Max Planck. The title of the talk, as you saw, was going from 1900 to the present day. And if we, in 1900 exactly, on January the 1st, about 12 months later, Planck discovered what's called the energy quanta. And according to mythology, he uttered the three words, "This changes everything." Now, it's important to know that Planck was, in fact, interested in scientific discovery, and he thought that the best results would be if you had no practical purpose in mind. You would, as it were, be inspired to do something original. So, as he was a serious, what I would call polymath and a top-class person, he would reasonably have said that the idea of energy quanta conflicts fundamentally with all past theory. So, I would add that I'm going to choose him as my first polymath, or using the phrase put forward by some earlier speakers, a self-actualized person. He, in fact, had difficulty in getting his ideas completely accepted, and he had finally got a Nobel Prize in 1918. So the question is, where were we in 1900? And I think the argument is quite clear. Science was in a good place. Atoms and molecules have been accepted as real. Looking back from now, 120 years, that's a sort of odd thing to say, but there were huge arguments about that. And unfortunately, there was a sense that humanity could master and control nature. The Industrial Revolution was going global, and using modern terms like WEIRD, standing for Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries, we, since I'm part of it, oversaw what we now see was perhaps not a good word, that was progress. Now, I, just by chance, found that Naomi Klein had published a book with exactly the title I'd chosen. So using that picture, how did we get here in 2021? Did we get any warnings? Were there people smart enough to say, this is not a good way to go? So I'm asking you to join me in an investigation, or two investigations. One is it possible that we can take a worldview based on social systems, which are living systems? And another idea, which I'm going to ask you to think about at the end, is why is it that certain ideas, concepts, fashions, paradigms become completely and utterly dominant? They're called hegemonies. So I'm choosing what I call polymaths, or self-actualized people who have done great work, did try and act, but we ignored them, we society. Now, I have spoken to ANPA before, and here's the slide which I used in 2017 And I just want to emphasize social systems. I will emphasize the relationship between the economic system and social systems. And when my research partner, Eric, and I were thinking about it, we said the social contract is to increase the general welfare of people. I'm going to come back to this at the end. Now, already, this is for you, Nicola. The name of the book Scale has been referred to. And if you look at the cover, it says that there are universal laws of life, growth, and death in organisms, so on. I want to add that the planet Earth, Gaia, itself should be thought of as a living system, which is not a new thought, of course. But on the right here, I would like to suggest that cells are living systems, organs are swarms of cells, and so on up to the whole Earth. So I've got a copy of a review I made of the book on Scale, if you're interested. What happens is I often read books on Kindle, and there's a feature there, and it's very easy to make respectable legal copies. And I've done several of these which have come up today. Now, this, of course, implies that we need to have a notion of what is life. And in 2009, a man came up to me out of nowhere, and he said to me, "This book belongs to you." And this book was life itself. Robert Rosen, towards the end of his life, had written what he tried to do was a summary of his very extensive work. And later, post his death, there's another easier to read book called Essays on Life Itself. Now, Rosen had studied the idea of life. He was passionate about answering this question. One of the things he found was that the language that we use is effectively defining the world as a mechanism. Now, obviously, if life is an organism, you're stuffed. So he also wanted that classical science, which is limited to quantities, should be evolved towards the ability to deal with qualities. Now, as Nick and Michael Heather know, Rosen that is, made a contribution to the basis of category theory. But in general, bright though he was, perhaps he wasn't a very sympathetic man, his work was rejected. He was, if you like, driven away by the hegemonic people. Now, my next choice is David Bohm. David Bohm is regarded nowadays as a serious player, but he was, first of all, respected when the ideas of quantum theory were, if you like, getting sorted out. And at the time, around about 1920s, he wrote the book on quantum theory, quantum mechanics. However, although he'd mastered quantum mechanics and he was in a way involved with those things, he, as it were, defected. He wrote a beautiful book called Wholeness and the Implicate Order, which has also been mentioned already this week. And as a result of that, he was kicked out from the inner circle. The high priests of the time were, in fact, building atom bombs and maybe later all more dreadful things. And they knew that if his new views were, shall we say, made public, because his reputation was so high, that they politically removed him. So, first of all, the message here is that Bohm believed in wholeness, and he believed that the reason that we do not, or did not at that time, have wholeness, we have a fragmented view of reality is because it was buried in the language. Now, he not only located what you might call the error of our ways, he tried hard to do research into how to escape this. And a lot of the book, Wholeness and Imbricate Order, is around a concept called Rio mode. Now, a person who shared the work of Boehm was a man called Owen Barfield. If you're familiar with English things, in Oxford in particular, there's great respect for a group called the Inklings, includes Tolkien and so on. And they, meaning the Inklings, which was a group which varied in size from 2 to 7 people, they thought that Barfield was probably the brightest of them all. When he was very early in his academic life, he actually invented a completely original approach to history. He wrote a book, which was the history of England, based on the earliest occurrence of words. This was regarded as an absolutely unique way. Now Barfield, he shared Bowen's language worry, but he was much more interested in moving, as it were, to what's been called in the last few hours, the sort of involved version. He thought that the language versions used by Western languages, in particular English, was the source of the error, but he was looking for something else. And he detected in his own behavior that poetry and music were, as it were, different. They weren't a language in the same sense as the spoken language. He became a student of Steiner. He died at the age of 99, and people think that he just decided he didn't want the birthday of his 100th period. Now, I have a lot more text on Barfield and Bowen, but since the last few hours have been heavy on mathematics, I'm going to try and move through my slides more quickly so we have plenty of time for discussion. Now, on the idea of life and social systems, there was a beautiful book, a little tiny book called Autopoiesis and Cognition. It's actually 2 books in one cover, and it's a study of living systems. And Sir Stafford Beer, who is a respected person in Liverpool University, which is in a sense our home at the moment, he said that this was a complete and utter paradigm shift breakthrough thing. It was a holistic approach. It brought together, not in a sort of plugging things together like a jigsaw, but looking at the whole thing, ideas, they call it the unity idea, which has come up with both John and with Nick. The key idea from the point of view of social systems is called autopoiesis. And in my search for finding people looking seriously at social systems, and partly as a lead from Andrew and Lou at the Spencer Brown conference, I looked at Nicholas Luhmann. And Nicholas Luhmann was completely and utterly addicted to the idea of theory. He's known as a sociologist, and he imported the idea of autopoiesis straight away into his thinking. Autopoiesis, by the way, is the idea that a living system at any level, cell to maybe the whole planet, has got a sort of combined purpose of repairing itself and reproducing. In the way that Luhmann tried hard to sort this out, he lived a long life and made lots and lots of serious efforts. He tried to sort out the process by which a system, an autopoietic system, communicates with itself and with its immediate environment. And he settled on a form of triadic communications. Luhmann implied that even if he sorted this triadic communications things out completely, that he believed that civilization had taken a really bad move when humans began to speak and then later on write and later on printing, and it's not possible to use strong enough words to what he thought about computers. So let's say that we did go off the natural way of doing things between 50 and 2,000 years ago. Unfortunately for Luhmann, he didn't ever take on board the work of C.S. Peirce. Luhmann had worked in the US, and I suspect that he must have had exposure to it, but for some reason he did not involve Peirce into his thinking about communication, which is very sad, because Peirce, who's now regarded as one of the world's best philosophers, particularly by people in the US, in the hegemonic argument I'm pointing, he was only respected well after he died. And there are a couple of things which we should know, and that is that Peirce's thinking could be regarded as an extension of logic and reasoning. He added to the normal pair of deduction and induction a notion which he called at different times different names, but is normally known as abductive thinking. And the idea there is that there is some sort of difference between what you know and what you'd like to do. It's like sometimes you can get a guess or a hunch, and he is often calls that creative and intuitive reasoning. I warn you, if you get involved in thinking about Peirce, you've got a lot of reading ahead of you. He was incredibly prolific. He was never formally in part of the what you might call the academic community, and is very, very confusing. You need to take some time. But Peirce is a very important person in this whole scheme. Now, if we go mentally back to when I started this story, which is 1900, maybe a little later, Joseph Brenner has produced several books. The latest one called Philosophy and Reality, I call it PIR. And the part of his life is he's trying to bring to English-speaking people the work of a French-Romanian philosopher, if you like, general polymath called Stéphane Lupasco. Lupasco, in his thesis, he wanted to call all of his work a new discourse and method, which in a way is what Bohm and to some extent Barfield were looking for. The central idea from Lupasco, which has been elaborated by Brenner in his book, is called the principle of dynamic opposition. Now, this is a fundamentally different notion, as far as I can tell, that comes in different words, but much very more clearly by Lupasco through Brenner, and that is that every entity has an opposite. And the opposites are called, in the normal, simple examples he gives, actual and potential. Something is actual, is in the way we think things at the moment, somehow related to the classical way of thinking about time and space. And the other one, which he calls, if you like, not actual, but the potential, is much more like the ideas of connected reality, information, and to a great extent, the idea that there is in the universe in reality, not only material, but immaterial things. So the actual corresponds to the material, the potential corresponds to the immaterial. And the interesting thing is that these two forces, or these two aspects, are forced together. They never completely reach 100% or 0%. And when they are incredibly well balanced at the 50% level, then a new level emerges. This is a very interesting idea, and it perhaps at one point should be compared to the work that that Nick was talking about to do with category theory and so on, but also the hollow movement, which is the notion that Bohm was putting forward for this, if you like, potential version of reality, which is non-physical, is perhaps, if you like, connectable to these ideas of Lupasco's. Now, at the beginning, I mentioned this sort of hegemonic thing, and I would like to just go through fairly quickly 5 of the ideas which come out in this, what I consider to be very complete work of Brenner's. And it starts off with the hegemonic things we have at the moment, which are sort of monocultures and should not be the opposite of hegemonic and monoculture, should be ecological, as it were, is we are committed to binary classification. Binary classification, if you like, is connected to the law of the excluded middle, and via the principle of dynamic opposition and so on, we end up with a new form of logic, which is, if you like, the law of the included middle. Now this, of course, has immense, if you like, implications. If we go to scientific knowledge, which is currently regarded, at least by the people that Brenner wrote about, as fragmented, then it's, if you like, obvious, particularly those of you in academia, that fragmentation and specialization go together. But a much better thing, because we're trying to study the universe as a whole, as a unity, is to not have specialized knowledge. Another, if you like, hegemonic thing is linear time. In the work that I referred to earlier, that I've done with my past friend and researcher, we use S-curves in investigating living systems, but the dominant part of S-curves is the linear part. And it seems to us that the hegemonic thing is to only consider the linear situation, and we then would move out to look at the beginnings and ends, the chaos, beginnings and so on, and ends. So space-time is different in the Lupasco-Brenner system. The global scale is another one, which is hegemonic. I think it's now obvious, particularly to the ecologists, that flying people around the world, moving things from one continent to another over the last several hundred years, has done bad things to the ecology. And on the capitalistic production side, the same sort of comments apply. I'm going to say a few more words on capitalism later. So, I promised in the title that we'd speak about biosemiotics. I would argue that biosemiotics has covered many parts of natural science. It's philosophical, it involves biologists, semiotists, and it is a different way, a different theoretical framework and understanding living systems differently from just organized molecules. And there are concepts in biosemiotics, as you can imagine, to do with cells. So this dual nature has been suggested. Let me make it clear what I mean by dual nature. Completely immaterial, as Nicola was saying earlier, there was a time when we believed in God and the material thing was a sort of derivative. And over time, I'm talking about thousands of years now, this oscillation have gone from it's all immaterial to it's all material. And it looks like, if we're right with the biological hegemonic thing to be changed, we should have a situation where we can have both. Now, ending, as it were, the outbursts on biosemiotics, in the 1800s, an incredible man called Vernadsky, he had investigated the chemical structure of the entire planet, and he came to bring the term biosphere the first time. And his claim, which is now supported, is that the biosphere links all living systems on Earth, and the living systems coexist with inert systems, which is how molecules move and living soil and so on is created. Vernadsky was aware of ideas which now have become captured by the biosemiotics people as the semiosphere is part of the biosphere. So the claim of the modern view of the biosphere is there's not just material chemical stuff, but there are signs. The organization in some way is related to science. And going further, an idea which we can pick up from Bohm is that thoughts have agency, as they say. The noosphere, not a respected term by a lot of people, but that is now regarded as part of a sort of extended notion of the biosphere. So, a rather depressing thought is that, according to Vernadsky, the stabilizing force in the biosphere used to be living systems, but is now moving to human responsibility. In the work of Brenner and the work which I've quoted to some limited extent on biosemiotics, the word responsibility comes up. The biosemiotics people and Brenner both take the view that, if you like, people in science, people who are moving knowledge around and influencing the planet, they should be thinking about responsibility. So here's some quotes from the semiotic literature. As semiotic animals, human beings are capable of global view and life communication. The question is, what is our responsibility towards life and possibly the universe? Thank you for that hint, John Torday. As a capacity exclusive for human beings, semiotics provides the key to a full understanding. Why do we not look at the entire planet holistically? It seems we're not able to do that yet. What we do know is that human beings are endowed with the capacity to suspend action, deliberate, and ideally do the right thing with consciousness and awareness. Thank you, Nicola. Therefore, the human being is invested with a new capacity to take responsibility for managing the planet. So let me quickly review where we've got to so far. Everything is a living system. It's the view I'm taking. Living systems have the purpose to repair and reproduce themselves. The planet itself is a living system, so planet Gaia is a living system known as the biosphere. The semiosphere is part of the biosphere, and living systems, including humans, share a universal language. This is not the language we speak, which is a sort of internal language, which I think various people like Steiner and Barfield were grasping for. In a rather sick phrase, humanity went off the grid 50,000 years ago, but according to Bohm in particular, the language we now use is the language of mechanisms, not organisms. Bohm struggled with this issue. Barfield insisted poetry was a hopeful way forward, and Lupasco and Brenner invoked many ideas, some of which came from the East. He didn't have time in this life to import many cultures, but at least he avoided just restricting himself to the West. So in biosemiotics, we get a sense of the whole picture. Now, here's Naomi Klein again. Here's a couple of quotes. We as a nation, this is a quote from America, we must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. So, coming from America, the home of weird thinking, that's one. That's, of course, Martin Luther King. A different dimension is a frequently stated point at the United Nations, is that developing countries should not have to deal with the results of a flawed system. In other words, there are people living in the southern hemisphere on islands which will disappear as climate change changes the level of the seas. In the slide of Naomi Klein, there are two words, capitalism, and the other one we'll come to in a minute, climate change. I, at one point, took a serious interest in capitalism, and I found a little book, again a strange book with two books in the same cover, which is called Historical Capitalism. The author, Immanuel Wallerstein, is without question a candidate for a polymath. He expressed very clearly the internal paradoxes of capitalism. Believe it or not, the GDP of companies and of, if you like, societies, countries, if you like, they believe we can have unlimited growth. Now, arithmetically, this is nonsense. 5% growth times 1.05 is not too bad, but 1.05 to the power of 60 is rubbish. There is no way. Now, of course, the reason that this can be done is they talk to themselves, but if we're dealing with the planet, if we are connected to the planet, there is no chance that we can use the resources which the planet can put back. The current rate is about 1.7 of the resources that is available the following year is being eaten this year. So we've got a hole and we're digging it. I would argue capitalism is doomed. The second word on Naomi Klein's picture is two things. Climate change and sustainability. On the left, there's the current effort by global society called the Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you who are not familiar with them, there are 16 different ways of looking at the world. Climate change has become the proxy for the whole thing, poverty, lack of water, etc., etc. And the 17th one is how we're going to implement it. There are 469 goals. It's obviously a creation of the mechanistic world. A thing which I would recommend is a little presentation of a beautiful book called Donor Economics. If you look carefully at this diagram, society is in the middle and the planet internally is underneath, and the other spheres are outside. The red, of course, is the usual thing. We are in danger with climate. We are in danger with population and so on. Now, I mentioned earlier that I used to be in a management group, think tank group, and at the time I was quite interested in the ways of Peter Drucker, management, the doyen of management. So I want you to think that you and anybody else that you can influence is part of a planet management system, and we're doing a little audit. Drucker says the actions that you take, the things you do, they should all fit together. Is what America's doing by exiting from the Paris Agreement a fit? No. Environment fit. Did we consider the environment when we set up capitalistic stuff? No. The stakeholders, are they informed? Are the 8 billion people on board with whatever those SDGs are for? Obviously not. And is the plan adaptable? No. They are 15-year or 30-year plans. So the classical situation is we have got a plan, it's fragmented. We have ignored the planet itself, the very thing which gave birth to us, and we've organized things to benefit the ones who wrote the plans. This sounds like a familiar story. Now, if we are, shall we say, perfect people, and we can move and throw a magic wand somewhere, clearly a plan should be holistic. It should include all aspects of the biosphere, with us as part of it. It should use probably nature's language until we figure out if the rail model is going to work, and the plan is obviously going to be an evolution thing, as it were, adjust as you go. Now, in the beginning, I asked you to think about 2 investigations. Here's a report of the investigations. Does using a different worldview help? Well, the real world is complex. The world of simple mechanisms is a surrogate world created by classical science. Semiotics represents or recommends a living system worldview. And here we have, the map is not the territory, a phrase often used. But let's be clear. We are interested in the territory. We're interested in having a healthy living system. Whether we view it in a classical way, whether we view it through biosemiotics or the biosphere is irrelevant. The second question was, why did anybody warn us? The Society of Answers says that there is a sort of root idea that anything which is not the way is made absent, is not even respected. So you heard about both. People ignored Rosen. But collectively, it looks like the hegemonic high priests are still active. I would recommend that the binary classifications thing is thought about clearly, because that is the only way to allow dialogue. So, my conclusions. If the real world is described as a living system, then our worldview is improved. Living systems based on material and immaterial entities should be part of our worldview. Signs and thoughts are agencies in the biosphere. This is very, very important. If we are going to act, how we think, how we behave, our moral attitudes and stuff like that, these will go through into the very actions that take place in the biosphere. So, a new worldview needs to be shared. I don't know how we can do that. One of my friends says, what are you going to do differently on Monday morning? Well, I knew he was going to ask me this, so here's my apology. In 2017, I wrote Economic Subsystem, and now I write Beyond Capitalism. I wrote Social Systems, a sort of global assumption. Now I say we need local and global. And most of all, I apologize. The contract should be not to, if you like, increase the welfare of the people, it's welfare of the entire planet. I was digging through some of my old slides, and I know that this was built on a very simplistic notion. You have a period, an era, if you like, and the name of the new era is identified at the three-quarter point. It just so happens that Schliessard solved Maxwell's demon problem and introduced information into the actual, if you like, equation of doing things. And the information age then, by that same scheme, goes there. I never expected to live this long, but I did complete the exercise. It looks like in 1980 up to 2020, the biological age came and went. I am putting at the end here a question mark. I don't know if anybody wants to put that. I will guess Nicola will say spiritual. So thank you for watching. My name is Mike Horner. That's my email. If you want the text and the slides, they will be available on request. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Can you stop sharing your screen? Then we can have discussion. Please.
I'm not sure how to do this, so I just close it. Right?
Let me see whether I can close that. Stop. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we are back in. We are back in the. I go for gallery view. So, I don't know. I'm yes. Okay, Anton. But let me just say that I'm quite overwhelmed by your lecture in a positive sense. So thank you very much for being so lucid and bringing everything together, things which I'm sure most of us think and perhaps even act. Okay, over to Anton.
Let me just quickly respond to that. I was very lucky. I worked in the computer industry and they kicked me out and I had early retirement at 55. I'm now 84, because 85 makes sure I had 30 years to think. These are some of my thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
Anton. Thank you. I'm equally overwhelmed by your lecture. But I've just, as a sort of as a point to put out there, not as a defeatist, but even if we trigger an atom bomb tomorrow, isn't the effect this is nature? You know, aren't what we're doing nature as it is? You know, of course we can improve our future, but in the global thinking or observation from far away, well, that was the nature of things.
I think if we add the word responsibility in there, then you're right, but surely at all stages. I mean, we have heard Vanessa well informed about things and you arguing, but surely the idea of responsibility is what she's asking for there. And I know that the people who built the bombs regretted it. I think that somehow the latter stages of the, call it the classical science era, we were so, as it were, committed to this ridiculous idea of growth and raping the planet and then poisoning the planet at the other end, that we should have realized that this was, you know, shitting in your own nest is crazy.
Correct, you know, and countries that did something just exported the pollution, their pollution and planetary destruction from their back garden into somebody else's garden.
So I tried to, as it were, frame the discussion knowing that this is potentially, if you like, interesting to a lot of people in a lot of dimensions. I'm really interested in whether this worldview, we call it a living system worldview, is actually improvement. And the second thing is, why is it that we ignore these people? Why is it that Bohm had to, if you like, get kicked out and go and live in South America for several years and eventually creep back into the University of Bristol while he was still able to do things? So now there's a Bohmian movement, but the guy is not going to, if you like, benefit from it or even feel that his ideas have been taken on board. And anybody who's, by the way, a member of the Scientific Medical Network, there's a huge flurry of films and lectures about Bohm and to some extent Barfield. Very interesting way to pursue this.
Michael, let me just start from a very small point, and that is what will you do on Monday? That makes me think of a Zen koan for beginners, which goes like that. There is an infinite number of stars in the universe. How do you count them? And since none of you is doing Zen as far as I know, the answer is 1, 2, 3, 4. So you start counting them one by one. And so every action, positive action, counts. So for example, when I go, I pick up 3 pieces of rubbish daily and dispose of them.
Let me answer in a completely unexpected way, I think. Somebody mentioned Maslow and the notion of, if you like, self-actualized people, and my chosen polymaths, self-actualized people. Now, I was fortunate to actually go and sit in the chair in the Western Behavioral Sciences Institute in La Jolla and sat where Maslow did his work. And I met some very interesting people. I was in a management course for 5 years over there. And most of the people which I felt were actually doing things, not just thinking about things. They had a sense of purpose. So there was no doubt in their minds what they were going to do on Monday morning. They might have had a big picture in which there were little pictures and so on and so on, but everything was a coherent plan. Now, in a way, the issue, perhaps because of the independence of human beings nowadays, is that to have a coherent plan, as anybody who's married knows, is somewhat difficult. But I would say what I'm going to do on the Monday morning is I am going to expand on this talk because I'm in the middle of writing a book, which I promised my research partner when he died in 2019 I would do. But I got trapped into doing social systems research for 2 years.
Okay, more observations, questions, comments?
I should be very disappointed if Nicola doesn't say something.
Yeah, she was just doing the dishes. Nicola, please come back to us.
I was listening and I finished washing up now, hooray! Which was, with my eco washing up liquid, which I get from refills from my lovely, whole food shop, organic food shop. So what I've been doing now for a while actually is asking for guidance, because you were saying, so you changed your middle section, you're approaching your Vesica Pisces in the middle, to the entire planet. And for me, the thing is that our planet is part of a solar system, which is part of a galaxy, which is part of the universe. And we are, we have a responsibility. I mean, I think, again, as I said last year, 2020 was, I think, we saw this horrific global socio-political thing unfolding, but I think there's more. The article that I wrote, which I will send to you, Lou and Vanessa, was called Divine Comedy, Deep Crisis, Deep Chaos, Deep Calling.
Could I ask you, Nicola, to make a comment on the 2 points I made? Is a low living system worldview helpful? And why didn't we listen to the people who were trying to tell us? Do you know that the ideas of the, if you like, oncoming disaster ecologically were first postulated in the mid-1500s? And in the 1600s, there was discussion about these things and so on. So, come on, you can't say what we're going to do next week. Why did we not hear?
Because business as usual is what rules. Because the way that capitalism works and has worked is by because it's a machine, and it's capitalism is a machine which it's a Frankensteinian machine which has it makes the rich richer and the poor poorer.
Okay, why do the people in that machine act as if they're not part of planet Earth? Why do they not change the machine?
Can I jump in before Nicola answers, and then Michael Wright?
Michael Wright is here. Good. Come on.
Hang a moment. Many years ago, I went for a talk to Brockwood Park. It was Krishnamurti. And I've forgotten what the talk was about, but there was one thing he said that stayed with me probably till the end of my life. He said, everybody talks about change, but nobody really wants to change. And you still have wars, you have people invading, robbing, killing. If you want to change, you can do it like that overnight. And I was with a friend, and when we came out, we felt like we were drunk, it was such a powerful impact, such a powerful person. So nobody really wants to change. It's nice to talk about it, but action is something very different. Michael, okay, please come in.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Barbara. I'd like to focus on one specific thing you said, and then make a slightly more general remark. This was in connection with your very nice little sketch of Robert Rosen's ideas right at the beginning of your talk. And I think it's a very productive exercise, perhaps, to try and get a better fix on exactly the way that Rosen was trying to put into, that was going to conceptually clearer, more formal terms, his understanding of the distinction between mechanisms and this more general class of systems, of which, of course, living things, organisms, were, for him, the kind of central instance, which he referred to as, actually in different places by different terms. In some places he used the term open systems, in some places, I think the term he settled on was anticipatory systems at the end. But the thing which he thought was really important, all important to understanding this distinction, to characterizing it, was that mechanisms, in a very broad sense, are characterized by the fact that we can understand their dynamics entirely in terms of a segregation between the notion of a state of the system and the dynamical law of transformation of that state, which is why they lend themselves to description by systems of partial differential equations. And this was something which he thought was a kind of limiting condition which was not satisfied in the case of these more general systems, what he called anticipatory systems or organisms. He was trying to put that insight into the mathematical context of his ideas about category theory, and particularly the kind of fundamental starting points of category theory. I don't think he ever really succeeded, sadly, partly, as you say, because he didn't get a very helpful reception from the key players in category theory itself. He was working for a time in this group at the University of Halifax in Nova Scotia, of which he was a part, and there's a long story there which I won't go into, but it's a great pity. I've had some ideas about how this distinction between mechanisms, the category of mechanisms, and the category of what you might call non-mechanisms, or things which go beyond the notion of mechanism, might be put into a more formal setting by looking at the way we think about conditions on the sections and fibers of maps between categories. But as I say, that's a very, very kind of general, handy, wavy remark. But I do think that Rosen's ideas go to issues in the foundations of mathematics in a quite extraordinarily deep way, and deserve far, far more attention and more people, as it were, deserve to be working on them than has been the case. The last thing I'm going to say, I'm really afraid I'm going to get myself have eggs chucked at me from left, right, and centre at this point, because I'm going to do something which I'm afraid is completely against the spirit of your talk. But I'm afraid I have to say it because I think it might provoke a useful reaction. Nicola points out that people have been prophesying the breakdown of the ecosystem and the death of the planet since 1500, 1600. Why haven't they been listened to? Well, a fairly obvious answer to that question is because the perception is that they've been crying wolf over and over and over again. And again, I don't entirely believe what I'm saying now, but I do want to put it out as a kind of devil's advocate, agent provocateur. You say that capitalism makes rich people richer, which it certainly does. It makes poor people poorer. It does nothing of the sort. It has consistently made poor people richer over the whole course. And just look at the standard of living of people in Africa. They've been raised out of abject poverty by comparison with the situation half a century ago. And the same is true in every other part of the world. It's just complete nonsense to say that capitalism makes the poor poorer.
Okay. I'd like to just give a tiny comment back on the Rosen, right?
Sure.
First of all, as I warn people, Life itself is very, very difficult to read, and it's because he does a really, really good job, possibly not using the very latest version of category theory. But here's something else which I would like to mention. Rosen really, really worked hard to get his thoughts clear. And here's what I consider to be a gem. He said, life is close to efficient causation. Now, what he says there is the following. You must know about all of the four causes. You must know about a system. You must know about a boundary. You must know that this thing which he's talking about is somewhere where it gets its materials, and it must have in itself whatever the purpose is in the final cause. I think if we were to be able to capture all that stuff in just those few words, we'd be a lot better off. He's a beautiful man, and I'm sorry that he died so young.
I couldn't agree more. I can just say very quickly, I compassionately agree with what you say. He was an extraordinary man. He died very sadly, very, very prematurely at the age of 60. He's a very severe underlying diabetic condition. I've corresponded intensely in the last 15 years with his daughter, and in fact have some of his unpublished manuscripts. And I'd like to get together with you to talk more about that. And I think his ideas about final causation, rehabilitating the notion of final causation, are amongst some of the most interesting interesting and deepest ideas he had. But I think some of the things he says, particularly in essays on life itself, for instance, he has that brilliant thing about the Church Pythagoras thesis, in which I think he goes to the very heart of the issues about the tension between our notions of the continuous and the discrete, in a way which is deeper than pretty well anybody working in so-called philosophy of mathematics has done any time in the last century. So I completely echo everything you say about Rosen and his work. And by my provocative remark at the end was of course intended just to be putting a cat amongst the pigeons, because I don't think we should encourage, as it were, easygoing agreement amongst ANPA. We should always be prepared to sort of, put a few provocative ideas out there.
But do you agree that the idea of binary classification is hegemonic, and we should be able to have dialects? Even Hegel should have.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by hegemonic. It's been central to our understanding of logic, and there is, of course, an aspect that goes.
Hegemonic is when an idea, like
Yes.
classical science, is so dominant that any other version of science is bad. Is made absent. Anyway, look at sociology of absences.
Well, hang on, we're going from one subject to another in an extraordinary sort of, dare I say it, leaping from one subject to the other. You were sort of talking a moment ago about the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction has been pretty basic to logic and to our idea of rational thought for the last 3,000 years. And there are, of course, questions around it. I agree. There's some very, very interesting tensions and questions around it. I don't think it's by any means the end of the story, the whole of the story. But I'm a little bit worried about this tendency to leap from the context, let's say, of foundations of logic and of, kind of very general formal reasoning on the one hand, to very broad and sweeping conclusions about social organization, the direction of the economy, the benefits or disbenefits of various patterns of either spontaneous or imposed attempts to organize the economy. These are all vastly complex and subtle issues, which I don't think permit of a batch of ideas just being transferred from one context to the other in quite such a, dare I say it, in quite such a free and easy way.
Thank you for that.
Right, I think I've said enough. I do apologise. Lots of other people, I'm sure, want to join in.
Well, I could just come back on the rich richer and the poor poorer thing. I think really what I should have said is that the difference has gone on becoming more and more extreme. So yes, there's that chap who made all those pretty balloon pictures.
Nicola, you still haven't answered my question.
Well, hang on. Let me just get.
No. We make a rule. The people making comments can't speak longer than the original presenter.
I'm afraid I broke that rule completely, so I apologise for that. But Nicola certainly hasn't, so give her a chance.
Yeah. I just want to have a little response to Bristol Mike, being a Bristolian myself, and then
Yes.
I'll come back to you, Swiss cheese Mike, okay, with your wonderful holistic holes, and So I think it's what's happened is that the extremes, it's become more extreme. Yes, as I said, that Swedish guy with all those pretty balloons, whatever he was, did all his pictures saying, oh, look, it's actually, the general level of material living has increased generally, etc. But it's still, the 0.01% of the elite compared with the,
Yeah, with great respect, Nicola, that's completely irrelevant to what I said. I didn't deny that the rich are getting richer, and I'm not saying particularly that's a good thing. There's no question at all that we've seen a much greater polarization of wealth in the last 30 years than at any time before. But the claim specifically that you made, which is a claim which is made by a lot of people who are basically, root and branch opposed to capitalism as a system, is that the poor are getting poorer, and that is just simply factually nonsense.
I admitted that now. I did actually say that. If you listen to what I said that it's
come on, why should we listen to what you say? Now, that's enough.
stop. Don't be personal, because I will switch off everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Barbara. I think male.
Can I make just one more comment on Mike's question on why haven't we changed? Has any of the, I'm not studied in the fields that you have studied, Mike. Has anybody in these fields addressed our sort of primal instincts? We are just animals in nature, and that capitalism is nothing more than an extension of tribalism, of gathering and protecting a smaller group.
Yes, it almost the exact opposite, because the big criticism of capitalism in recent years has been that it's been the great motor of globalization and the breaking down of what you might call of local and tribal loyalties. That's almost the opposite of the criticism that most people make of it.
Right, Michael, what are you going to say to that? No, not Michael. Michael, Swiss Michael.
Okay. In 40 minutes, it's difficult to touch on all of the relevant heavy thinkers. One which I unfortunately left out was Darwin. And in response to you, Anton, the idea of competitiveness rather than cooperation is a huge mistake. And if you look at the history of early life civilizations and so on, people had to cooperate to live together. People had to cooperate to survive. If you look at the behavior of cells, pity you didn't hear John Torday, the idea of cooperation exists at all levels, from cells up to society. The idea of a idiot man who's completely and utterly selfish and greedy in the middle of the philosophy of capitalism is one of the paradoxes. It's bullshit. Now the problem, back to management thinking, nobody owns the system.
Yeah, before anybody comes, I'm sort of having second, third, and fourth thoughts about capitalism, because some of you who know me know that I was born in Poland, which had a sort of pseudo-socialistic system, which was really like a communism. And I can assure you that with all the good slogans and equality, so quote unquote, it's not much better than capitalism. On the contrary, it's even worse because it gives you much fewer chances.
Don't be too binary. They're not the only two choices.
No, I mean, we do have, in principle, let's look at Western democracies, okay? And what is happening now? Aren't we tending slightly towards totalitarianism? Well, I'm setting my cat amongst the pigeon, of course.
Sorry, Barbara, could you just repeat what you said? You were slightly tending towards slightly, and I didn't quite catch what the last word was.
Totalitarianism.
Oh, totalitarianism, yes. Yes, I understand that. I understand the claim. Yeah, well, I think we are tending towards a soft form of totalitarianism.
Yeah, so it looks like that my life was wasted, going out and away from one thing, only to fall into something very similar.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I must get some food for my laptop.
I take it we're in the general discussion session now.
Bye, everyone.
Right.
We need to leave.
Bye. Okay, bye.
We need to leave. We're going to say goodbye.
Been very nice seeing you again, Peter.
Yeah.
Hi, Peter.
Yeah, good to see you, Michael.
Yes, very good to see you indeed, and I'm very fascinated by your talk. Extremely interesting ideas
Thank you
there. I'd
very
love to
much.
correspond with you.
Okay, let's do that. Okay.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, shall we stop recording, because
Yes.
Oh dear, have we been recording? I thought we'd actually stopped recording some time ago.
No.
I would have wanted my robust defence of capitalism to go on the record if I'd known. No, I'm all right, I'm just joking, I don't mind.
Recording stopped.
Now we can let that go down.
A bit of discussion, of course. Yeah.
What is your third? I mean, sorry, but can I just ask Michael? I'm so sorry, Barbara. I didn't mean to talk over you. My apologies. Sorry. I was just going to ask Michael. You say that you say that capitalism and the old now, let's say, no longer, as it were, a model that's on the market, but what used to be described as the economies of the Second World, or so-called actual existing socialism, i.e., the old planned economies, the Soviet model, are not the only alternatives in prospect. Well, I'd agree. The second certainly is not an alternative in prospect at all. And what seemed to be the case after the fall of the Berlin Wall and after the triumphalism around the success of capitalism in the late early 1990s, the idea that there was going to be this kind of hegemonic American so-called neoliberal model, more or less uncontested forevermore, has also clearly gone out of the window. But the things which are contesting it currently certainly don't look any more appetizing to me. So what is the alternative that you really have, that you want to put forward? I mean, the only pressure for doing anything effectively on any scale about the threat of global climate change and all the other environmental pressures is coming, whether you like it, willy or nilly, from public opinion, particularly public opinion amongst younger people, precisely in the developed, inverted commas, capitalist world, and in the more democratic parts of that. It's certainly not coming from places like China or the authoritarian states of neo-authoritarian states like Russia, and I can't see any other alternative on the horizon. And put it this way, I don't think life is not going to get any better for the inhabitants of Afghanistan anytime soon, and that is not going to be because their new rulers, about to enter Kabul almost any hour now, are going to impose a capitalist economy. Except when it comes, of course, to the sale of heroin.
I would like to answer in the spirit of Nick Rossiter and his talk on category theory, where he gave us a three-level model. You are talking at the low level. I'm talking at the metaphysics level. I am saying that the principal design of capitalism is flawed. Therefore, there is no way anything which is vaguely under the notion of capitalism which come out. I am personally not gifted enough to imagine how we can get from here to there, but I am certain that if we don't do something at the philosophy level, the metaphysics level, the fundamentals of the stupid paradoxes, we'll just crash and burn again.
Well, the problem is that it's not you speak about designing a system which is better than this, but the whole point is that this system never was designed. Have you ever read Hayek on spontaneous order? All the attempts to supplant it by a system which was designed actually turned out to be completely catastrophic and result in much worse consequences.
I would still maintain that if the theory is wrong, then the practice is wrong too.
Well, what is the theory in this case? The theory, I've
already told you, Mike, at least two. One, infinite growth is stupid because the planet doesn't have the resources. Secondly, the idea of a greedy, if you like, selfish person in the middle of the economy is itself flawed. That's not how people are.
Right.
Well, do you think people are instinctively and naturally unselfish?
Michael Heather wants to come in.
Sorry.
Okay. Please, Michael Heather, please come in. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. The category theory, sorry, I think is natural. And for example, topos has this exponential structure. So this is why you've got the pore at the bottom and the rich at the top. You can't do anything about that. And this you can shift it a bit, but this egalitarianism.
I am sorry, Michael, but what on earth has topos theory got to do with income distribution?
Well, because it controls all processes, all transactions. There are plenty of papers on transactions. And that's the structure. That's the natural structure. It's not a Euclidean one. And the point is that if you try, the only way you can get everybody equal is by everybody having nothing. And that was as Barbara pointed out.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with the last point, but I mean, as attempted in places like Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, an earthly paradise, I'm sure we'd all agree. But I can't see what any of that has to do with topos theory.
Well, because perhaps you don't understand topos theory, I'm sorry. But the other thing really is just the real great problem was in the 19th century, the decision of the English courts in Solomon and Solomon. There they ruled that you could have a limited company so that you could do things and not be responsible for your actions. Well, that is right against the jointness. And that's why the whole system is blown up with these multinational companies. There's no freedom.
Well, I'd agree that the notion of corporate responsibility as embodied in the law of joint stock companies is something which probably does need revisiting in a very fundamental way. I wouldn't necessarily agree with you there. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you there. I'd also echo very much the sentiment of, I'm sorry, my mind's blanking for a second, the Varoufakis, the former Greek economic minister, who of course is a sort of critic of capitalism, and who I think has some very interesting things to say. He pointed out one thing which I thought was spectacularly perceptive, which was that when the institutions that more or less governed what you might call the age of Keynes, the first 30 years after the Second World War, the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development, the World Bank, and the other things which were set up at Dumbarton Woods in 1945. The conference which that system was set up with all its flaws, system which basically broke down after the 1970s, there was one category and one category of people alone who Keynes prevailed, in fact, on Roosevelt and Churchill to make absolutely sure they didn't receive any invitations to that meeting. And that category were bankers. There were no bankers at Dumbarton Oaks. Jolly good. So I would say, and Varoufakis' suggestion is go copy.
Right. Can I just ask Frederick Young whether he wants to come and talk to us, because he keeps on putting interesting things in the chat. So I'm not sure whether Frederick you want to contribute now.
I'm done.
Before, yeah, you are muted, so you would have to unmute yourself. Yes. Well, guys, you can have a look, guys and girls, you can have a look in the chat, of course. Yeah. Michael, you are muted.
Are we in general discussion now?
Yes, we are in
Okay,
general.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Barbara. Thank you for all the stuff that you put together before, during, and presumably afterwards.
Not presumably, definitely after. I was just going to say that I hope to process the recordings next week.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Barbara, for all the work you've put in. Without you, obviously, this wouldn't have happened. I mean, thanks to all the ANPA members and especially all the speakers, but thanks especially to you. And thanks again for the fact you're going to do all this work with getting the recordings up. I mean, I've done that myself, and I know it involves a lot of work. So once again, thank you on behalf of everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. So I think Frederick said he's switching computers. So if you want to hang on,
Barbara, I sent you a link
perhaps.
or invitation to the ANPA YouTube channel on your Gmail account, so that you can.
No, I did. I did, Anton.
On?
I did get this invitation and I replied. Thank you very
okay.
much.
I haven't looked
No,
at
no,
my
we are
emails
sorted.
since then. And
No,
if
no.
you've got problems, we can make a quick Zoom meeting and do this together.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. I mean, I'm a bit paranoid. I always keep stuff in many places. So I will upload this Zoom recording to my YouTube channel and then we can swap it into ANPA.
That's not paranoid at all, Barbara. That's just very sound sense. Everybody says, information doesn't exist unless it's backed up in at least 3 different places. Yeah. And I've always thought that's probably an understatement. Make that 5 or 6, and even then,
Yes.
You're very wise.
Well, it's enough to lose data once. I mean,
exactly.
when I did my PhD thesis, I spent about a month doing measurement of tunneling in small molecules, and it took me a month to collect the data, and then it was gone. So once is enough.
Well, you're in good company. You obviously know what happened to the original manuscript of Newton's Principia. Well, no, he had to rewrite the whole of the Principia because, unfortunately, his dog Spot, when he left it in the house one day, and knocked over a candle and set fire to it, and it was completely destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, I had a... Oh, okay, Frederick is coming. But I just finished. When I worked for the Open University, we had a lot of excuses for students not delivering on time. And the best one was that my cat has vomited on my TMA.
But probably perfectly true.
Okay, hi, Frederick. You wanted to contribute. We were waiting for you.
Oh, I'm not sure what you want. I just know quite a lot about Rosen. I consider myself kind of a follower of him in some sense.
Fascinating. Did you ever meet him?
No, unfortunately, I never did meet him. I came up with a modeling method way back in the 70s, working on my PhD. I was working on the growth rate problem in E. coli, how all these separate control systems were integrated into a single control system, and I discovered a really good principle that I'm working on now with James Lindesay, and it kind of, nobody cared about it. It was probably 50 years ahead of its time, and it was based on ratios. So there was a paper by Rosen where he said, what could be the dimensionless numbers of biology? There's too many quantities with the same dimensions. And then I realized that these dimensionless numbers I was using could be related to Rosen. So then I read Life Itself and all these other things.
Yes, I read that paper too. It's utterly fascinating. I think your choice of expression 50 years ahead of his time is very apt description of many of Rosen's ideas too. I think he's going to be a figure that looms larger and larger in our intellectual awareness in the coming years. I certainly hope so.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And then after the genome was sequenced, that people were saying, how do you put them all together? And I said, I know. So I had left biology and gone into pattern recognition and had started a couple companies. And then after that, I decided to go back into biology because then what I had done would be appreciated, but even systems biology became fragmented again.
Yes. There are a handful of people, I think, following Rosen's ideas. There is, you may be aware, particularly in cancerology, some of the new ideas there, which are kind of pushing back against this very, reductive, genomics-based picture of the etiology and mechanisms of, interesting choice, terminology and mechanisms of cancer. For instance, do you know the work of Giuseppe Longo?
I've seen the name, yes, indeed.
Yeah, okay. Well, he, I think, has taken up some of Rosen's ideas, including the ideas which I think are most relevant to his ideas, which unfortunately were never developed as they deserve to be, in Foundations of Math. Where I think he had some astonishing intuitions, but unfortunately, partly because of the way he was treated, dare I say it, by the category theory community, I don't think he ever really kind of had the intellectual self-confidence to pursue them as he might have done. But Longo has written some very interesting recent papers particularly about cancerology, exploiting Rosen's ideas about the distinction between mechanisms and other kinds of systems, in principle, at the level of kind of general applied systems analysis in structural biology. And I think it's quite interesting looking at some of his ideas.
Did he write a book about code biology or something? Have I got the right person?
Sorry, about what kind of biology?
Called code biology.
Not that I'm aware of, though I don't pretend to know all of his papers. He's based in Paris, although he's Italian by extraction. He actually works. He's at the École Normale Supérieure. He works mainly on. Well, actually, he's quite a polymath. But he works mainly on, I would say, on the sort of the structural end of biology. And
there's been a little discussion in the journal Artificial Life because of what he said about, mechanism. He was saying.
Are you talking about Rosen now?
Yeah, somebody.
Yeah, sure.
Rosen again. Now back to Rosen. Somebody was saying, that. Rosen was saying that you couldn't have artificial life, so there were a couple papers in that journal about whether you could or couldn't have artificial life given what Rosen had said. Those are interesting papers. Of course, it all depends on your definition of life, and in some cases, perhaps even of artificial. But he certainly didn't believe that von Neumann replicators were going to be the basis for the understanding of life. No, and one of his students, I forget the first name, Michaluki, who worked on network thermodynamics, wrote a paper that calling him biology's Newton.
That's interesting. If you have the time to send me a reference to that, I'd be very grateful.
Oh, okay. I find your email address in the ANPA list or something.
Oh, I can send you my reference. I put it in the chat. I'm sorry, we're monopolizing this a bit. I think probably other people need to come in. Sorry.
No, you just put it in the chat, and I will send you something.
I will do. Let other people come in. I'm sorry, we're monopolizing this too much.
I think we want to close the discussion and go to bed or start working. In Luke's case. Sorry, I'm picking on you.
Okay, quite understood. But can I just say to Frederick, I'm just putting my email in the chat. If you look at that, if you'd like to send me the reference to that paper by the guy who was Rosen's pupil. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Yes. So I wait a little for closing the meeting, so everybody.
Thanks. I'm just
can
doing
save
it now.
the chat and live comfortably.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we do hope to meet next year. And in any case, what I think, looking at how things have developed, that even if we have the in-person meeting, we still would have a Zoom. So we probably go for blended. At the moment, everything is in the air. There is some finite probability we would be in Liverpool, but that's obviously up to Peter, and he was rambling about Andrew Crompton, but I'm not. So we just need to wait and see what happens.
Well, I think we all hope very much that we can meet face to face. It would be lovely to, but I also agree that having a permanent Zoom presence is also a very good idea. Is that?
Well, yes, that will be, yeah. So.
Thanks again to everybody then. I'll say cheerio. Thank you again. Thank you, Anton. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, and yes, and Lou, thank you too. So I hadn't seen you there. Thank you very much. I really look forward to talking to you a bit about your talk yesterday, especially. By the way, Frederick, can I just say the email that I've just left in the chat, I made one boo-boo, a typo. It should be lowercase m for the start of my name, not capital M. Otherwise, it's correct. Okay. Cheers.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye, Lou.
Bye.
Bye.
It's lovely to see you, and thank you again for wonderful talk.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Barbara. Have a wonderful year.
Yes, thank you for your lovely talk. It was very good beginning, lovely opening. Yeah. So.
Are you closing off the discussion now?
Yes.
Are people hanging around to discuss still?
I think there are just 6 of us left.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, Michael. 2 Michaels.
I'm just logging out actually, but unfortunately I have to do something.
Okay.
But it's been a wonderful discussion, and thank you all very much indeed for a great meeting.
Yeah. Well, James, you have to think it's 9:30 in UK. I know it's difficult to think about it. And, yeah.
I understand. I absolutely understand that. Enjoy.
Yeah,
have you had your dinner, or are you still waiting to have your dinner?
Oh no! I had a sort of pizza.
Oh,
that's,
good.
I reserve pizza for these occasions. Normally I don't have it, but it's quite handy. Yeah. So you are going to have lunch soon, do you?
Oh no! I had lunch during the break.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I had to have lunch then.
Okay,
It was great seeing everyone I've seen before, and also it was great meeting the new people. So I very much enjoyed myself. I wish everyone the best.
Thank you, likewise. Okay, I must get the chat. Okay, bye.
Bye, Barbara. Thank you for everything.
I'm glad you could make it in the end.
Yeah, I'm still in the.
Are you still in the hospital?
I'm still in the ward. It was a bit quieter tonight, fortunately.
Yeah, no, I mean it was. Yeah, we are very concerned about your welfare.
Oh, it's very kind. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know when I should be coming out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, you're going to switch us all off now.
Yeah. Okay, so have a good rest. That's what we need. Yeah. Okay, bye.
Bye.